So, what can you tell me about any arthropod? They got jointed appendages. Okay, so they got complex sensory organs, and what else? Behavior patterns. There's three. You got three left. Maybe you've said them. I just didn't hear them. They have an exoskeleton. There's four. Now it's hard to remember what was said and what's left, right? What's that? Tracheal tubes. Yep. And what you're eating. Reduced competition. Why? Because you're not competing for the same food sources. That's right. That's the sixth one. All right. So, if we're talking about any crustacean, any one of them, what would an example be? Say that again. I have no idea what you're talking about. I do not watch Futurama. So, everybody else, does that sound accurate? Okay. All right. Or you could say Sebastian from Sebastian is Little Mermaid, I think. Okay. And there's two other examples: crayfish and the biggest of the crustaceans, lobsters. Okay. Horseshoe crabs are in a different class. Those are which happens. What's the class name of the horseshoe crabs? Meristomata. That's right. Okay. So, different aspects will tie in some of these animals as far as what their feeding habits may be. So, why would that be? Why is the feeding habits going to be different between a crayfish and a crab or a lobster? How's their environment different? Where do you find crayfish? Perhaps in rivers, which means that's what type of water? Fresh water. Crabs and lobsters are found in salt water, in the sea. That's right. Okay. So as we continue, obviously you're not going to have tracheal tubes for these animals, okay, because of these structures. So what's kind of unique about this, okay, with the gills, all right, ventilated by movement of appendages on the water. So if it's not water currents perhaps, how are these animals breathing? Well, it could be their movement. And that's not just isolated to these animals. There's a certain type of fish that has to do this. About that for a moment. So this is not just unique to these animals. There's a certain type of fish that does this as well. In other words, the water has to continually be moving, whether it's by water currents or them moving. Sharks, that's right. Yep. So one of the things that when we talk about this in biology is the idea of the movements of these materials across the cell membrane. And at that level, it's probably really boring, and I can't argue with that either, because looking at it from your perspective, it probably is. But when you start applying some of these concepts, okay, you use this diffusion probably more often than what you ever would have thought, okay? So I wouldn't expect you to remember this, but anatomy and physiology. What else besides osmosis diffusion and facilitated diffusion do we talk about in anatomy and physiology? It has to deal with the nervous system. It's a type of transport. Not ring a bell? Remember active transport, remember you have to push molecules against a concentration gradient, okay? Where this here, this diffusion moves down rather than up, okay? And one of the aspects, has anyone ever heard of Narcan before? What might, you're nodding your head yes, what might Narcan be? Yeah, so if you remember from this video about jellyfish, this researcher has a broken off tentacle that goes by and swipes him in the lip. Okay, so he's up on the boat. Then what is he doing? He grabs this bottle and doesn't chug it. He just dumps it all over his mouth. It was vinegar. What might that vinegar do to those? Yeah, it slows it down. It doesn't allow them stingers to continue to exactly doing what they're meant to do and continue to sting him. So this Narcan, okay, so who can we pick on? I always like doing that in class. Sure is not an answer. You. Okay? You're an opioid. Are you heroin? Are you fentanyl? Or what are you? Gesundheit. Or Oxycontin or oxycodone? Oxycodone. Okay? So who do you want to be? That's hot. We told it funny. Okay, so we'll just we'll say you're fentanyl. Okay. So now, who do you absolutely want to destroy in here? Who's Gampa? Okay. So you're out to get him because you're this fentanyl. Okay. So now it's your goal as well. That's what the drug does. It's not your goal. It's not your fault. So it's your effect to immobilize him, and that's what people do when they take this. I can see. Has anyone ever had to take a prescription drug before? Even like codeine, I've had that before. I want to say it was another, painkiller when I had stitches put in my finger. Okay, and unless you've been on these painkillers, it's kind of hard to describe. I can see why people kind of say, wow, this just makes you forget and it does, okay? And that's mainly what it's intended to do, so you don't have to worry about the pain, but it's your goal to get him. Who do you think would step in the way to get to him? So Alec, you're Narcan. So what's your goal then and what you do quite well, what does Narcan do? Yeah, it stops. It kind of makes a barrier, kind of like that vinegar or acetic acid stops them active stinging on them tentacles, so it can't go any further. This Narcan then blocks the receptor sites of you trying to get to him. So if we start applying some of these concepts, I'm not saying it's more interesting, but hopefully it makes a little more sense. Okay, moving on. So this is not the first time we've seen this, okay? We're not going to get to a closed circulatory system until we get to the most complex of higher order of animals, which we discussed 5 of them. So what might them, well, I'll let you write this first. So, what might the 5 higher order of animals be that we're going to talk about next semester? Just start. Mammals. But you're telling the truth. Birds. Or aves. Reptiles. Fish. Really slick skin. Scale. Not snails. Frogs, salamanders, and amphibians. That's right. Because when we get to those, we call them higher order animals because this then changes. It goes from open to what? To closed, which means it's going to be pressurized. We are not designed as humans or mammals to have blood pool in an area because one of the things that will do is leads to blood loss. These animals are designed to have this blood pool in an open area, and it stays there until what, maybe? It was one of the questions about clams that was on your papers last chapter. So the blood pools in an open area, then what happens to push that blood back into the bloodstream? Has something to do with the foot. Because the foot is a what type of structure? It's a what? It's a muscle. So when that flexes, what does that do to the blood then? Yeah, it pushes it back into the bloodstream. With what part? Yep, that's correct. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So that's the difference is right here, rather than having open sinuses, that will be replaced with capillaries. Okay? All right. So we got one, and then we're going to get on to the insects. If I'm not mistaken, when we're talking about polarized light, we're also talking about ultraviolet light. So the sight that these animals have is by far even probably more complex than ours because we cannot see UV light. Now, some aerial predators, going back to the class aves or birds, okay, can probably track mice really, really well. It's not that they can hear them, they can't smell them, and it's not that they see the mouse. Eventually they will, but it's something that the mouse leaves behind that they can see. Nope, it's not. It's not. It's not. It's something that they leave behind. Somebody said it. Urine. We cannot see urine either, but what urine reflects is ultraviolet light. There are certain types of birds like falcons who are known, or not falcons, kestrels, who they're in the same class as falcons. They can detect that ultraviolet light, so whether they're in the snow or in the grass, they just follow the trail. There's the mouse right there. Just like leaving a whole bunch of breadcrumbs right up to them. Being able to see ultraviolet light. All right, so what we want to do then tomorrow is begin talking about these guys, okay? And probably the biggest difference that what we see with all other arthropods is, oh shoot, this, and, well, not so much the legs. But my point is, how many body segments do insects have? 3. They have a head, thorax, and an abdomen. Okay, so that's going to be an evolutionary advantage because more space, more movement, flight, all those, but not all insects fly. One aspect to look at that is what's probably the most common insect that does not fly. 3 letters long. Ants, although that's 4 ants. And that is, I'm sorry, one of the stupidest movies in my opinion. Ant-Man. Agree? Anybody? Or has anyone not seen Ant-Man? Okay. Well, the premise behind it is actually kind of neat, but I don't know. That's just my personal opinion. Ant-Man, no. All right. So again, we will pick up with this tomorrow.